Good morning, United Kingdom. Good morning. Good morning, everyone, to Lakhi Singh, the property fixer. Live drive time, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. every morning, talking about difficult, important, and social topics around property and business. So we've had lots of different speakers on to leave us because he's upset. I've upset him for some reason, but that doesn't make a difference. I will continue because I can. So I'm going to continue talking about the main topic for this week being buy-to-let mortgages, and actually a topic that we have, buy-to-let mortgages, but is the buy-to-let market now obsolete? Are buy-to-lets going to be around? Do we need buy-to-lets? There's also a changing landscape on legal documentation. We've went across and discovered lots of things that were happening in Wales, and I think Wales are slightly advanced to the United Kingdom in delivery of regulation on the buy-to-let industry. They become very top-heavy regulated. Landlords are required to comply. They're required to register with redress schemes. They are also monitored by the local councils. They have random audits. If you don't meet the audit requirements, you can be withdrawn from the Rent Smart scheme, which is a scheme that Wales are operating. So yeah, buy-to-lets become very regulated. Will it finish? Is it going to go out? Maybe not. Maybe it's going to be weeding out these unprofessional, these accidental, as they call them, landlords, and go to more professional, business-like landlords who are managing and running their properties professionally, keeping on top of repairs and maintenance. There's lots of scandals out there, obviously. Landlords who have failed to ensure the health and safety of their tenants, who've let properties become dilapidated whilst people are living in there. And people sometimes are forced because of economic circumstances, because they can't afford rental values, and they are where they are, and they are just trying to make buy with what they have rather than what they don't have. So there is an environment, there is an issue there that creates an environment where unscrupulous, as they call them, landlords take advantage of vulnerable tenants. And then you've got an influx of illegal workers, migrants from all over the world coming to United Kingdom, fleeing from war-torn countries, also coming in and being exploited. So the question is buy-to-let going to go out? Is it going to be a fad? Is it no longer going to be around? And remember, buy-to-let only cropped up in the last 15, 20 years, straight after 2000, where developers, banks, and lenders collectively created the buy-to-let bubble, the market, or the bubble in the property market that everyone talks about. If it wasn't done voluntarily, probably involuntarily, because of the natures of capitalism, I would call it. I won't say greed. I won't use the dirty word greed, but I will say the forces of capitalism that created the property bubble. But this bubble was probably multiplied by previous bubbles because it had an influx of unlikely property investors and landlords, people who'd never invested into property before, probably used to putting some of their savings into investment accounts and to stocks and markets, all of a sudden realized that properties were also an investment tool. And even though they didn't understand the nature of property, and we've covered this topic before, that when you sign on that dotted line, it's just like any business. You cannot afford to be apathetic. You can't afford to sign thinking that this the loan you're getting for these properties, or the monies that you're acquiring, is money that doesn't have a requirement to be repaid. Unfortunately, a lot of the tools that the banks were using, the financial tools like interest-only mortgages, again, a fundamental flaw in the way that this bubble was being created. So you have the developers, obviously, developing a new build, trying to satisfy the housing requirement, but building new build properties that were built low cost, possibly not in the same way that the old buildings were being built. So using stud walls and other various building techniques that weren't traditional, but being able to construct large blocks of flats and houses in a shorter timeline, creating the asset, but overvaluing the asset, obviously to take out more money from their projects. And I can understand that they were led to believe that the values of these assets were more because they were newer, but were they really new? Is it a bit of a myth there? Was there some game being played by the surveyors, the valuers, who were valuing up because the banks were happy to lend because of unregulation, because they were given free rein to print money, as it would say, and give that money to mortgagors, people who had never seen that type of money before, didn't know how to handle money, or weren't really purchasing these assets with a clear financial analysis of their ability to repay that money. So there was a bubble, and this bubble was quite unique to any bubble previously. The bubble that was created had an effect of engineering an obvious inflation in house prices. So a property that was worth 100,000 had shot up to double value, £200,000 for the same property. Ridiculous, but an inflation. And you can understand the principal reasons for the inflation, because everything was being overpriced. And there was an objective. The banks wanted to lend, people wanted to buy, people wanted to become financially free, get out of their 9 to 5, and inadvertently create financial freedom for themselves. Obviously, the dream. And then you had all the training and the property companies selling the dream to individuals to make them feel that they were basically going to get out of the 9 to 5, because if they acquired 10 properties, they would have an equivalent revenue stream of, if not more than double their 9 to 5 income. So a lot of sort of aspirational type of pictures being created about the property market. And, we had people come on who've been very practical about the matter and said, look, property is a business. You can't think a property is going to create money itself. You have to manage it just like you have to manage a restaurant or a factory or a warehouse or an online business. You are required to keep on top of those businesses. And likewise, you should have done the number crunching. You should have realized that these assets and the cost of these assets, even though they were giving people unthought of release of equity to go out and buy more properties, There are a lot of people out there who are already in property, but they all of a sudden realized they'd gained, a few £1,000,000 overnight because of the inflation of house prices. So therefore, those people were led to believe that taking out equity and using it to acquire more properties and multiplying the number of properties they had led to even the shrewdest of property investors or landlords to become technically insolvent when the market crashed. So 2007, Northern Rock crashes, a Mortgage Express or Bradford Bringley crashes, and all of the lending that's out there, all the values out there, literally fall over weeks and months by 30-40%. Excellent. But not a good recipe. And now we're still dealing with the fallout of that, because however we look at it, since 2007 and 8, after they had a slight increase in interest rates with the banks, even though the central bank was reducing its interest rate, people were automatically falling into default. So that was a bit of a stress test for the banks to see, well, how many people are going to go under if we increase our interest rates? And the result was quite damning. A lot of people were falling into arrears. So what they did then was they sent out these communications to all of their mortgagors, letting them know, good news, the interest rates are now reduced. Central bank has reduced its interest rate. So you can use this opportunity to pay back your arrears. Now, the banks were being exceptionally soft and patient with a lot of the mortgagors at that time, because the objective was get these people back into line, get them out of the arrears. Otherwise, it would have been about an 80-90% default rate across the whole of the buy-to-let industry. But keeping interest rates low, I think, was a strategy by the central bank, thinking it would create capital recovery in the property market. It hasn't happened. We've had slight inflations and deflations, Olympics. So you've had these little grand events that have created a hype on the property market, but not enough to sustain a continual rise. So the issue is, where are we? Is buy-to-let an obsolete solution now? We've done the buy-to-let. We've realized that people can't manage money. We realize buy-to-let itself is a complicated industry. Not everybody can become a buy-to-let landlord. So is buy-to-let dead? Is it going to stay alive? Is there going to be a change? Are we moving away from assured short hold tenancies, and are we going more towards lease type of apartments, which is what happens in America? So there's a changing landscape. And because we have Lakhi back, I think, so we're going to ask. Okay. So even though we don't have that environment or that changing structure, it's not an issue. We have to look at a life beyond buy-to-let. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, I've been in buy-to-let and I've understood the pros and the cons. So it's a natural progression for me to get back into buy-to-let, but come in with the knowledge that I've had. Yes. And I think for a lot of people, it should be of profession. It should be a choice for the future because it can work. But there are those people who've run out of time because they've spent 2 cycles in property and in these type of industries, and they've on 2 occasions lost everything they've made. Now, these people are the type of people who haven't learned from their mistakes. It's difficult, it's troubling, it's worrying. But what is a 50-year-old or a 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old individual going to be doing if the only thing they know is building and property? The question is going to be redesign, re-engineer, creative. Yeah. Okay. We have Lakhi back for some reason. Lakhi Singh was morning sickness, I believe. Lakhi Singh, vomiting.
And I've been here all along, just listening in. I think we just missed each other by 1 minute in the intro because I was backstage. But anyway, I'm on now. How are we doing? I've listened to the introduction, so do continue.
Okay, so we've given the foundation of today's discussion. We've got Sonia Lambert, as usual. Good morning to you, Sonia. So the discussion or the topic is, where is Buytolet? Is it going to be around? Are we going into leased properties now? Is the assured short hold tenancy going to be weeded out? Will we have lease properties? Will it become more commercial? Because Buytolet technically is regarded as a commercial asset. I mean, if you look at your insurance policies for your housing or for your building insurance, the Buytolet property on there is regarded as a commercial property, not as a residence being used as commercial. So therefore, is it now that the Buytolet industry can become more business-like? Like we've discussed this previous week, we realized a lot of people became accidental landlords or aspirational landlords. They're not really business landlords. They're not treating property as a business. They're treating it as an extra revenue stream. A bit like you in your business endeavors, once you treated the post office or the estate agency as a silent partner, the end product of that became failure. Is that not is that not a metaphor or an example of how a lot of people got into property once properties were being given out with, you know, ridiculous tools like no money down deals and cashbacks? Was it not, you know, a trap and a lure for people to basically inherit a bundle of debt that they couldn't manage? So where do you think the buy-to-let market's going, Lakhi Singh? Is it going on the down? Is it going on the up? Is it flattening? Will it remain? What's going to happen to the buy-to-let market?
So I think the buy-to-let market's still there. So it's not the foundations of it are still there. How you construct it is different. So what you've got to do is the parameters, which, like you said, going back to 2007 at the time of the crash and the build up to the crash, is quite a different phenomena. That phenomena was led by different market factors. At that time, you had you could actually offset your interest from your rent against your tax. So that was made it accessible to the common person as a potential retirement vehicle. You could, you know, there weren't so many issues with stamp duty. Stamp duty was quite low. At that time, you had an abundance of finance from newly sprung up banks and buy-to-let organizations, which were really keen to lend. And you had literally thousands of providers of buy-to-let finance. Now, that landscape that we knew from that overspilled from 2007 after the crash is still being prevalent up to a point leading up to the last year or so. But now that landscape, because of governmental changes on taxation, there are at least about 10 technical tax changes that impact the way the buy-to-let taxation formula is calculated, and the way to minimize your tax is very different from what it was 20 years ago. So that's a one fundamental difference.
I'm just going to hold on the point of tax. I know one of the changes is that the HMRC basically tax you on the full amount of your rental income, and they don't allow you to deduct business expenses or your mortgage payments. I think business expenses are used. The mortgage payments are not allowed to be deducted. Now, I just want to stick to that point, because that's one of the major things that created the restructuring of people's portfolios. And we had a lot of, I believe you had lots of clients come to you, Lakhi, who were restructuring their portfolio predominantly because of that one rule. That now people who were paying out millions of pounds in monthly contractual payments to their lenders, that also was being taxed. Now, I can understand HMRC coming out with certain rules that are genuine, loopholes or missed areas of collection, but isn't that just a pure sort of draconian rule to just kill landlords? Why would you logically want to tax money that you're paying to the bank where you're not getting any benefit from it? Isn't that the way, anybody, someone simpleton like me would look at that tax and think, well, why on earth has HMRC decided to tax us on the monies that are going out to the lender, even though I'm not getting any beneficial interest of that money? I'm not getting any, making any money out of that. I'm basically taking that money and paying it directly out to, just like an expense. Why are they taxing me on that interest?
Basically, as soon as the taxman, so to speak, or the government, let's say in broader terms, realize that there's a lot of money being made by buy-to-let landlords, they can obviously see HMRC is obviously reporting into the government about their revenue streams and what's happening. They could see a lot of money being made by capital growth and
income
from buy-to-let portfolios with literally millions or tens of millions.
Capital growth, that goes back to the taxman through CGT, so it can't be capital growth is what they're looking at. Why would they want to tax?
No, I'm saying something a bit different. I'm saying that they've just seen that people are making money. They can see that there's a...
Surely there's got to be a logic behind taxing them on money they're not really making.
The logic is really simple. It's nothing, I would say, if you want to be a little bit crude about it, it's nothing to do with anything but the government realizing that they can make money from the hard work of landlords. And if the landlords have now established their portfolio...
There's a challenge to this rule, though. I mean, they've made the announcement, surely at a landlord level, there must be 101 associations out there that protect the rights of landlord, taxpayers association, etc. Didn't anybody pick up on the fact there's no logic behind that rule? Taxing contractual payment is the same rule, and I understand this rule is only for the interest payment. So anybody on a repayment mortgage who's paying back the bank in the majority of their loan is not really going to suffer the consequences of that tax rule, because there's only a small amount of interest that they pay. But it's for those who are on interest only. But that was the bulk of the market. That was actually the majority of the market. So we've got before you answer that question, Lakhi Singh, we've got a big line of shout outs. We've got Mr. Noor making moves. Obviously, in the commercial department in MC4U. We've got Bob Singh, as usual, making the Lakhi Singh, the property fixer side. Gurmeet Singh, also online with us. Sonia, we've already given a shout out. My favorite, and all of our favorites. Sejal Patel, shout out to you. We have quite a few new people as well. I'll try and remember their names, and we'll come back to them in about a few minutes. So continue, Lakhi, with that bit. Tell me, please, how is it that nobody's challenged that rule, but rather lots of people came out and started restructuring their portfolios?
Okay, well, there's a couple of fundamental points which are not always, that you say, seen by people at large, because that's what happens behind the scenes. On the whole, I mean, I attended, I think, an Evening Standard debate on the London property market. I think it was in 2010, where there's about 1,000 people in a room in central London and Westminster, where we had a discussion around what's going to happen to the property market. And the discussion actually pretty much said it all, because I'd say 95% of the audience were almost anti-landlord, and any landlord that stood up, they were seen to be a, let's just say, somebody greedy, just looking to make money off other people. So I think the psychology around the majority of people who are not into business or property, the typical 90 people, is quite socialist, and they're thinking, the rights should be of the tenant, not of the landlord. So that psychology itself.
Interesting. Like you think you've drifted from business and slightly shifted over to a bit of politics there, socialist. So is it about capitalism and socialism? I don't know. That's a new question you've put on the table. Let's try to understand. Are you saying it's some bald-haired, vengeful accountant sitting in one of the governmental offices? Is it, why are these people making money? Let's tax them on the interest payment. Is that the way it's happened? Is that your?
I think it's simple as that. I think there's basically what's happening is people are, let's just say, paying their income tax, and they have to pay income tax on a certain level of against, they get expenses and income, and the majority is income if you're an employee, so you have to pay tax on that. Yeah. So they've just taken a very simple formula of somebody making money from rent against a mortgage and whatever, you can offset it, but they're disallowing it so that they can maximize tax profitability. So I don't think it's this conspiracy of sorts. I just think it's simple mathematics. If the government can cream some money from anybody in any circumstances, then they'll do it.
Is a question then the amount of interest payments they make, or that which is contractually due? Clever question. I will answer that in a bit, and I'll ask you what I'm trying to allude to. We've got a shout out from George, obviously not George Clooney, but George on the group. We have Zishan. We have a new person whose name, and we also have the wonderful Maxine. That's right. We have Maxine as well. Big shout out to all of these people who are listening in today. I think they're focused in on Lakhi Singh and the wise words of the property fixer. So yes, tell me, what if I only paid 10% of my mortgage payment? Would I be taxed on the 10%, or am I going to get taxed on the actual contractual amount that I should have paid?
To be honest, I'm not really a tax expert, and I'm not going to go into the technicality of how it works, because I wouldn't know. That's what let my accountant do that. But in simple terms, all I know is that if you're having to pay, you can't offset your interest payment against your tax. So it just reduces the amount of profitability to hardly anything. So the
Just
simple solution to
creaming
that is
off
that,
the cream
sorry?
from your income. It's taking the cream out of your income, basically. It's another way of them stealth tax, as you want to, maybe the word would be stealth tax. So trying to get in income from your earnings. Okay, and I assume there was
I mean,
a
there's another technical reason for it as well, which is also maybe it's reading between the lines. Actually, is there have been quite a few landlords who are quite new to sort of collecting rent that haven't been declaring their income.
But that's like punishing the masses for a few.
That's right. So they haven't been declaring their income on their rentals, some going back 10 years, because they've simply just collected the rents and not paid any tax at all. So the way to sort of potentially bring them out of the woodwork is that if everybody's got to be, let's just say, moving into limited company, because most portfolios only work from a taxation point of view in a limited company, unless you just one small asset.
I think you've actually started a topic that Neil Soha's questioned. He said, can you assist in getting a buy-to-let moved over into a limited company? So I think he's talking your language now, Mr. Singh. Continue.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, yes, we can help people to move their assets. We work with a lot of tax specialists, so that's not really going to be a problem. But having a limited company brings other issues. So you've got to be aware of all the CGT issues, and are you trading a property, or are you holding a property? So the buy-to-let landscape has changed. You've got to really understand business and taxation and funding in its comprehensive, let's just say, in order to ensure that buy-to-let is not a dead industry. So you can make it work, but you've got to really understand it's a bit like a crossword puzzle. If you haven't done one before, it'll probably look a bit impossible and probably take you days to work it out. But once you've done you understood the mechanism and the psychology around doing a crossword puzzle, you'll probably find that you become very good at it.
I think, okay, let's go back to that other issue. Surely there could have been an underlying desire that a lot of people start paying down their mortgages to reduce the amount on the interest payment so that they reduce the tax going out. Maybe that was another reason. So the cash that was being held by lots of landlords, they were trying to encourage them to put that cash back into the bank's pocket to bring down the loan to value. And if you look at it honestly, if you bought a property at the right price, and this is, I think, a very old saying that you quoted in lots of different seminars and presentations that you've attended, that the money that you make in property is at the time you purchase them. So the buying price determines the money you make. So if you're buying at the wrong price, obviously you are going to be finding taxation on interest payment, tightening your income streams, that you're going to find the actual regulation on you. And I was talking about Wales, South Wales. It's got the Rent Smart scheme. It's heavily regulated, top downwards. And there's a lot of landlords who've just decided to throw their keys in because they just can't cope with the amount of regulation and the speed of that regulation, because Wales is become very aggressive. It's very sharp in its implementing of the tax and the regulation scheme, to the extent that lots of landlords get sort of notices, and they are very swiftly and quickly dealt with in terms of losing control of their portfolios. So it has become quite tenant focused, like you said, socialism, the word. Now, it's an interesting mix, isn't it, Lakhi Singh? Socialism, capitalism, the housing market, You need houses to put people into. You can't build houses unless you don't have a capital structure. Socialism doesn't build houses. Capital builds houses. You build the houses, you need socialism to house those people. But where does the money to afford the housing come from if you don't have capitalism? Which way around does it work?
It's quite a difficult mix. In order for the housing to exist, you could actually argue that if the government taxes people and a landlord actually has to pay a lot more tax than he or she was paying pre a lot of this regulation, then a lot of that money is going to the government to do good for the common person, to provide more social housing, to offer more funding to projects which are going to help the vulnerable or the less fortunate or the homeless. So it all boils down to policy and deliverability of government policy. So if it was a case that it was a completely, let's just say, socialist society, then it would be the perfect world. So then if you did give tax and you thought, okay, well, I know that 90% of that tax is going to go and help other people, so that would be a different story. You may actually look at what's happening in the buy-to-let market more as a blessing, because it will be somewhat almost godly that you're helping other people.
An interesting way of looking at it. Before I hold it, that's very interesting. An interesting way of looking at landlords. Now, if everybody had that opinion about the intention behind them acquiring an asset to be somewhat godly in their intentions, there wouldn't be a requirement for regulation, would there, Lakhi? Because everybody would be worried about the tenants. They would be spending the monies that they got from the rental incomes, or at least any surplus monies, back on the properties and not trying to book their expensive holidays. Bob Singh, interesting point, mentions non-disclosures, and also another reason that the market became hyperinflated, and that was self-cert. So giving people the opportunity to give an honest declaration of their income. A question rises there. Is it greed? Was it greed, or was it aspiration? And can you be godly if you're led by greed or aspiration? Because ultimately, if you're godly in your intent in purchasing an asset, maybe a few assets having been run properly was the formula, and not many assets that were being run unprofessionally. Lakhi Singh, what do you have to say to that? Godly, very strong word.
Couple of points. I think most people did actually buy it for, let's just say, either you call it greed factor, you could call it aspiration, you could call it clever business, because it is actually a potential business tool for a lot of people to potentially create a passive income or a business income for themselves. Mm-hmm. So while the opportunity is there, there's quite a few business people that hopped on board, but majority of people that did jump on board are probably aspirational people who didn't maybe have that sort of knowledge about what they're letting themselves into.
But so were they godly, Lakhi? Were they being godly in the fact they got a property? I mean, I would say that you're not buying, you're not getting a cat off your neighbor, and you say, well, okay, I'll try and look after it, and then you realize after 3 or 4 months you just are not geared around worrying about the cat and how you're going to feed it, so you decide to give it back, or you give it to somebody else who does know how to look after cats. My question is, you're buying the property, ultimately people are going to live in that property. What is it about regulation that makes people afraid to do the basics? which I assume comes from the intent, and the intent being godly, why would people, cut corners against regulation once regulation has been created to safeguard the tenant?
Well, there's two aspects to that. One is that I think, let's just say, the majority of people that have taken on property in the beginning of the cycle, when Buytolet became more prominent, there wasn't really that much regulation. And I think the reason that regulations come into place is that there's, let's just say, the minority landlords which don't have due care for their tenants, and they're called slum landlords. And what's happened is they've created a picture of really landlords, which is probably a bit more media hype than reality. And what's happened is the councils or the government have put in a lot more draconian regulations, because they've actually put the regulations down to everybody, because to ensure that the rules are followed to the T, because it's the few that actually have created the problem. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, it's just like anything, like the financial advisory industry. There were a lot of financial advisors at some stage, or quite a few, which had a lot of malpractices. They were selling certain products where they're making massive profits from. So they were, let's just say, almost 200,000 financial advisors in the mid 90s. And now they've dwindled down to maybe 20 to 30,000, because the regulation is now so high that it's almost impossible to become one unless you've got money behind you, or you're part of an organization that's already there. So it's a similar principle.
Regulation has a purpose. Cuts out all the unprofessional lot, and make sure people are working within a certain framework. But what I'm trying to work out is, you have an industry, a business. Can business be godly? That's my question. You said godly, and I'm focusing on that because out of your conversation, there has come two questions that, for someone in business, would be quite regarded as quite surprising. An element of godliness, and not godlessness, but godliness, and then an element of social welfare. Can business be socially geared? Can it be religiously geared?
What's happened is
you've got something called. They're saying, one of the listeners is saying, if you follow regulation, then you can sleep quietly at night, at least peacefully at night. Yes, you can. But the question is, if you don't have the money to follow the regulation, if you don't have money to do the refurbs, to do the repairs as required, etc., then you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. There's no money available out there. What do you do? And this is a question to you now, Lakhi. Do you maintain godliness? Do you maintain social responsibility? What is it? How do you do it?
Okay, well, the question's a bit scattered, but I'll answer it in a simple way. Everybody should really be thinking in a responsible way in the first place, in their behavior, in the way they work, the way they think, which is only good for society, first of all. So sounds a bit like a political broadcast, but that's the case, I think.
Okay.
I think that should be the foundation. And then if you're getting involved in property or in business, if you don't understand the framework or the regulations, it's best not to really get involved, because there are a lot of hoops you have to jump through. And if you haven't really got that sort of mindset, or the ability, or the patience, or the rigor, or the funding, then best to just steer clear and not really get involved in something that you haven't got the ability to deal with, because you're going to be ending up with the inability to deliver, and probably end up either losing money, losing assets, and the chances of success are going to be lower because you're going to be taking on more than you can chew. So that's point 2. Point 3 is that corporate responsibility is now built into a lot of organizations, and it's an important part of what they do, and they're seen as a good practice now. So a lot of organizations that maybe even maybe are not necessarily seen to be the best type of organizations, a lot of pharma organizations, even though they're selling things which could be, let's just say, medically, those drugs that they're selling are probably creating a bigger problem than they're solving, but holistic medicine might be better. They're trying to position themselves as a responsible corporate, like they're socially responsible, but the reality may be quite different. So I mean, there's a lot of contradictions in social responsibility, godliness, and business, and I think the intention should be, if you're doing business, is to be doing good things ideally. I think Anita Roddick is a good example of somebody going out, actually creating something new, also that's socially responsible, selling natural cosmetics as opposed to chemically based cosmetics, which has actually been good for things at a social human level. And at the same time, she's done really well out of it. So I think there's a room for social responsibility and making money, but it's not necessarily easy, because you may have to pay more money, you have to be a bit more innovative. So not many people go out with the intention of trying to solve the housing problem when they go out to start getting involved in property. A lot of them want to make money, and so they can retire early and have more holidays. But I have met at least a handful of people who do have the intention of working with homeless people, or try to create something that's going to be more strategic in terms of creating a difference to the communities out there.
An interesting comment coming through from Cam Patel and also Mr. Soha. That's Neil. Cash rental incomes become difficult, he says. And Cam says that you really need to know, is that what he says? He says it's really important that you know. Okay, a lot of people, the comment is a lot of people have jumped onto the bandwagon not knowing about property and the risks, but which we've realized now, because I mean, the market tells you that. Lots of people out there have lost their jobs, lost income, were into property, left their 9 to 5s, got into it. Property, now they neither have their properties and neither do they have a job. Okay, saying of the week. I'm going to change the topic slightly to get out of the depth of what we're talking about and come back over to doing something frightening, that's something that scares you every day, apart from your health. And I know you mentioned it. You are somewhat a avid follower of alternative foods and medicine. So leaving that, what else scares you, Lakhi? What is it that scares the Superman of Mayfair? Is there anything else?
I think what scares me is not always knowing what's around the corner. So there are, I mean, COVID-19, obviously that's a health-related risk. Then now in business, there's a recession. So what is scary is that in reality, the media, the government, the people on the street, the politicians, nobody really knows what's around the corner. Are we going to be, like you were saying, I think we were making a joke last time about being microchipped. Are we going to be microchipped? Is this vaccine, is it going to be somewhat a control mechanism? Is the world economy, is it going to collapse? Are we going to move into complete cryptocurrency or some sort of digital currency that nobody knows about? There's lots of riots in the streets in the last few days, with literally, I think, tens of thousands of people marching, reference to conspiracy theories. So question is, what's really going on? And I think we just got to be very careful to stay grounded and probably work within what you've got, rather than get too carried away what's actually happening around you. Because if there's control, then I think what you've got to do, the solution is to stay grounded, look after yourself, eat well, and probably focus on maybe your health only, and your mindset, and everything that's happening around you. If you get suckered into it, that itself is actually going to potentially make you ill, because any type of anxiety technically, or depression, leads to some sort of organ failure, or some sort of glitch with your health. Increases your anxiety, and that causes cancer.
Okay,
so the question
talking
is
about that, Lakhi, this is interesting, that the psychology has its own effect on your health. That's what you're really saying. And it's
that's
the
right.
psychology of being in this environment where people seem to feel that they're losing their control, and the frustration of that. And I believe you're talking about last week's, well, it wasn't a riot. I think it was more of a march, and it probably turned a bit sour. You got a few hundred baton charging on you, so there's going to be some fallout of that. But there was a
I saw it on Russian TV, so they probably
yeah.
exaggerated it a bit. So
Yeah. So, but the fact is, people coming out because of the frustration, and I think it's correct to say that the psychological effect of something can actually determine your health, and it's agreed. There are scientific facts to say that people can effectively make themselves think they're pregnant and have all the sign of pregnancy. And so if it can be done psychologically, that probably rings for illness as well. So I know you have been doing a lot of psychological retraining, not to say that you're psychologically trying to become pregnant. I know it's not possible for you, but I mean, in terms of, you apparently have started to grow your own plants in the garden or something. Is that right, Lakhi? Or you're attempting to start gardening?
well, basically, there's a program on Prime Video which I watch called Fat, Slim or Dead, which is about a gentleman who travels across America just doing pure juicing for 60 days as a detox, and he shares it with lots of people. But he literally, goes from 180 kilograms, something ridiculous like that, to 90 kilograms. He almost loses half his weight and becomes super fit. So I think that was a bit of a motivation, because I think certainly I have to admit that the last since January, February, since the sort of rollout of the lockdowns taken place, I think my health is usually very sort of high energy, but I usually sort of 10 out of 10 in my energy, 9 out of 10 at least. But I've been feeling more like a 4 or 5 out of 10, and for me that's not good enough. So I've decided to take drastic action myself, and take responsibility. by number one,
Mm-hmm.
exercising a lot more regularly, because I think I fell into the trap of getting very busy with work but not looking after myself. I had a test done recently which said that it got slightly high cholesterol. That's never really happened before. So I think the being in lockdown and maybe there's more you're not really able to maybe move as much to do any steps. I was literally doing 10,000-15,000 steps walking around Mayfair in one day. And then if you're only doing about 300-400 steps in a day, and then if you're going out for a walk, it's only limited. I think that's certainly had an impact. So I'm just now detoxing my body, eating mostly greens and fruit, and actually minimizing my take of processed food. So I will eat it, because obviously if you go, parents have made something, or you're going out for a dinner with friends or family, you don't really want to be the person who's going to be difficult with the menu and where we go. So 9 times
Excellent
out of
advice
10.
there. So you need to start eating more greens, you're saying, Lakhi Singh. That makes a lot of difference. I think greens are the safe bet, and lots of beans as well. They're probably a safe bet, Lakhi Singh. Like lots of beans. They're quite
I think that will get the pulse going. Boom, boom.
Yeah. So beans and greens. That's what Lakhi says. The property fixer.
Yeah, I think juicing is really healthy. There's a book by Jason Dale called I think it's called Slim Fast or Juicing. I can't remember what it's called. It's a yellow and green book by Jason Dale. I definitely recommend that one. And it will help you psychologically to get out of any bad food habits. So I've literally cut out sugar, trying to cut down coffee from 2 or 3 to just 1 to 0 ideally, and then lots more water.
Okay, so sugarless chocolate muffins. I like that. Nice idea. Okay, we've got Sejal, who talks about lease options, and it's become a bit of a rave. She's saying a lot of people buying mixed residential and commercial as well, using lease options. Cam also, and Neil, and also Sonia. They make different comments about their experiences. One of them says it's a bit worrying times, and the other one says a lot of uncertainty. Obviously, Sonia refers to her time trying to refurb a property but not being able to because of lack of funds. So having to place a homeless person in as a guard tenant, I think there's another solution there for a lot of people who are looking for new ways of creating tenancies. I think you can, there is a company that uses the aspect of a tenant being a guard as well as a tenant. So it's a bit in between being a leaseholder and being an AST, on an AST, where the individual is required to secure the dwellings by living in it. It's a bit of there's lots of new solutions coming out there in the market. We're closing into the last few minutes. Lakhi, you've not given us anything else you're afraid of being your Superman. We don't know really what your kryptonite is except for the virus. And I believe the virus is now picking up again, unfortunately, around the world. A special prayer out for everybody who is affected by it, and a special reminder to everybody to please take care, wear the mask. I don't know how much the screen protects people, but I'm sure now we've learned from this first cycle that a mask, it's a small amount of money to lay out, and it has a large benefit. So please do start wearing a mask. It is a bit awkward. One does feel a bit weird. You feel like you're a brain surgeon, but without the scalpel. But it does protect people, which is an important thing. And you must be wearing it and try to make sure we minimize the effect of this potential second wave. Right, Lakhi Singh, last word. Buytolet, do you think it's going to be around? Still, last summary. Social housing, godliness, profitability, greed, aspiration, all of these things put together, will the buy-to-let market be around? And will people buy properties at the right price? Will these prices come down to an affordable level where the rental income provides decent revenue to afford the regulation? Your take?
I think buy-to-let is here to stay. It is dead if you're trying to use an old formula from the 90s or the early 2000s. So you've got to get with the program and actually look at what financial tools are there, what the tax situation is, what the yield and the purchasing price should be, and what your exit is. If you're not clear about your exit, are you going to hold? Have you got enough tenants? Have you got the right type of tenant?
Talking about hold, Lakhi Singh, we're going to hold you to that because we've run out of time. Again, just getting into the teeth into the topic again. So Lakhi Singh, we're going to have to say goodbye, Property Fixer, until tomorrow, 8 a.m.